My name is Bipin Kumar. I am CSPC project coordinator and volunteer on the program committee. We are about to start the panel titled Effective Public Engagement Around Emerging Technologies, Insights, Challenges, and Strategies, organized by the Environment and Climate Change Canada. This year, the CSPC provides simultaneous translations and closed captions for all panels in both French and English. Scan the QR code on your table to download the app and access subtitles in your preferred language. Please use your own device and headphones. We do have the conference mobile app. Feel free to download the app, available on the App Store or Google Play. And please remember to tweet about your events, favorite events, and panels at the conference using @SciencePolicy and hashtag CSPC 2025. Thank you.
Can everyone hear me? Oh, good. Okay. All right. Good morning, everyone, and welcome. I'm Jennifer Winter. I'm the Departmental Science Advisor at Environment and Climate Change Canada and a professor at the University of Calgary, and it's my privilege to moderate today's discussion. To start, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge that I normally live and work on Treaty 7 territory, and today we are gathered on the unceded traditional territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe Nation. For countless generations, the Algonquin people have lived, cared for, and gathered knowledge on this land. Let us take the opportunity to reflect on what it means to be able to meet here today, to learn, share, and build connections in the spirit of respect and collaboration. So our panel today is on effective public engagement on emerging technologies. And whether you come from government, academia, civil society, or the private sector, it's wonderful to be able to come together today with a shared interest in how we connect science, policy, and society. We're living in a time of incredible discovery with emerging technologies such as AI, biotech, and geoengineering potentially transforming our world. Alongside excitement about new technologies, and a lot of them are like really, really cool, so let's acknowledge that, there's also uncertainty, with people asking what could these technologies mean for us and how might they shape our future. That's where effective public engagement is essential. It's more than translating science into simpler words, as we've heard throughout the few days we've had together. It's about understanding who the stakeholders are in the space and what their roles are. It's about listening as much as we talk and making sure that the development of emerging technologies reflects the values, insights, and concerns of real people. And that's why I'm particularly excited to have our discussion today. So we're going to focus on geoengineering, specifically carbon dioxide removal and solar radiation modification. I'm very pleased to be joined by 4 fantastic panelists with really interesting backgrounds that will let us dig into these issues of effective engagement using geoengineering as a case study. Okay, so I'm going to go randomly? Yes, okay. Since I can't remember my rights and lefts, I'm going to go randomly. So Julia Bellotti is a research fellow at the Institute for Responsible Carbon Removal, a research institute based in Washington, D.C., and focused on the ethics, policy, and justice dimensions of carbon dioxide removal technologies. She is also pursuing a PhD at the University of British Columbia's Institute for Resources, Environment, and Sustainability. She is a social environmental scientist who has extensively used community-based research methods to explore community perceptions of novel climate technologies. Vida Gabriel is founder and COO of TerraFixing and an entrepreneur tackling climate change. She's recognized in Forbes 30 Under 30 North America and named as a tech entrepreneur to watch and one of the most notable women founders in clean tech in 2025. She has a PhD in sustainable chemical reaction engineering and almost a decade of engineering research experience. Together with TerraFixing co-founder Dr. Sean Wilson, they developed direct air capture technology designed for cold climates, producing high-purity CO2 for remote communities and large-scale carbon removal for the world. See what I said about like some of these technologies being really, really cool? Jim Mann is founder and CEO of Undo. In 2019, Jim co-founded the Future Forest Company, a reforestation effort with a mission to remove carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and restore biodiversity across the UK. Realizing that tree planting could only go so far in helping solve the climate crisis, Undo was born to deliver large-scale carbon removal projects with a permanence of 100,000 plus years. With pioneering enhanced rock weathering technology, Undo's operations lock away CO2 while improving soil fertility, food security, and the health of our oceans. Okay, last but not least, Juan Moreno-Cruz is the Canada Research Chair in Energy Transitions and Associate Professor at the School of Environment, Enterprise and Development at the University of Waterloo. His research explores the intersection of energy systems, technological change, and climate policy, with influential work on solar and carbon geoengineering and recent studies on how energy access and consumption shape urban economies and the environment. And a fun fact that Juan and I also did our PhDs together. Yes. Okay, so that is enough introductions, and let's dive in. We're going to be keeping it very conversational. I want to thank everyone who made this gathering possible. Start thinking of your questions. We're going to have about 50 minutes for discussion, and we're going to reserve a lot of time for audience Q&A. And I know that not everyone is super comfortable with coming to the mics. So if you have a question, you can also text it to me. So my phone number is 403-462-7158. That is 403-462-7158. And I'll curate questions from my texts and from the microphones. Okay, to start, I want to start with a personal perspective from each of our panelists on effective engagement. And so I have two questions, and I'm gonna turn the panel loose for this discussion. So first is, what has been your most surprising or challenging experience engaging non-expert audiences? And what have you learned about communicating uncertainty and complexity without losing trust? So I think, Juan, we'll start with you.
All right. Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm very happy to be here. I've been working on solar engineering for the last 20 years. That's how long it's been. So the field has changed a lot. I used to open up explaining what it was, and I still feel like I have to do it, but I'm not going to do it today because we don't have time. And I think if you're here, it's because you know what solar engineering is. But in 2005, when I was starting to do research on this, and I Googled it, there were 5 hits, not 5 pages, just 5 hits. There were 5 articles, and that was it on solar geoengineering. And then right now, we're talking about thousands and thousands of results, which meant that as I started to think of this research, literally everybody I thought were being introduced to the topic. And there's a lot of responsibility on that, I thought, no? Like the first time somebody hears the topic comes from you, then that kind of shapes the way they're going to perceive the technology moving forward. And I thought, okay, I'm gonna go, there is a blank slate, I'm gonna go and say things. And as it turns out, there is no blank slate. Everybody has mental models. And as soon as you start to talk about something, they're starting to frame it in the way they think they frame what you're saying in the way they actually can understand based on previous experiences or based on common knowledge. One of the biggest surprises for me, for example, was that discovering the chemtrail conspiracy theory. This idea that governments are controlling our minds through spraying things in the skies. And of course, when you talk about solar engineering, that is literally putting stuff in the stratosphere. Then the jump that people need to make between one and the other is very small. And if you walk in naively into a conversation thinking like, hey, this is the first time that these people are gonna hear it, and thinking that you can build a rapport from the start, then you start to make big mistakes, because you're actually entering a conversation that is already happening, even if it's not literally about about the technology. So that was one of the biggest surprises. And this actually could turn really bad. We get like life threats and stuff like that for people that misunderstand that. And at the beginning, I was thinking like, okay, what is wrong with these people? But then, and this is the learning part, is actually the way we actually talk and the way we actually bring what we know to others as you were saying, as explaining in simpler words what we want to do rather than actually engaging people in the process of discovery. I think that is the part, like I think we all do this because we are curious about the world, and then we forget about engaging people in that curiosity from the beginning. And if we do that at the beginning, then you can talk about uncertainty and you can talk about complexity more openly, because when you're trying to defend a position, then we tend to say like, no, there is no uncertainty here. There is just, this is the option that we're going to do. But when people are engaged from the beginning, and you can talk about those uncertainties, because what we're doing is try to resolve them. At least in my job as a researcher, is resolve those uncertainties. So I think what I've learned is to engage with people, try to understand the mental models in which they come from, not criticize those models, and then engage them as early as you can in the process. So now internationally, we have this opportunity as well, in which a lot of development happened in the North, as is the case. The Global North was and has been the leader of research on solar geoengineering, and now we're expanding it towards the Global South, and the we are expanding it is problematic. So the we part is problematic. So now there are international agencies and NGOs that are trying to develop capacity in the Global South so that actually the process there doesn't repeat the mistakes that we made and actually starts from the beginning in civic society and researchers from the Global South developing and the research questions and research programs that are best for them. So there are a couple of institutions that are doing that. So I think we have done better in the 20 years. We're doing better in the 20 years since I started, but there's a lot to go through.
Okay, thanks, Juan. Vida.
Hello, everyone. I'll take the second part of the question, but just before I'll introduce myself, talk a little bit about direct air capture. I'm coming from the position of industry, so I'm hoping to bring a little bit of that perspective. So what tear fixing does is we clean the atmosphere from carbon dioxide. We know that emitting and carbon dioxide is a big bad greenhouse gas. And in addition to our efforts to have to reduce the amount of carbon dioxide that goes into the atmosphere, the sad fact is that even if we completely stop all emissions, the Earth would continue to warm because of this accumulated volume of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. I'm talking to an audience now of scientists. I'm realizing with all the nods, I didn't have to give that intro, but here we are. And so in addition to reducing, or we need to capture and clean up our atmosphere. And when it comes time for us to develop projects and this question of what have I learned about communicating uncertainty and complexity without losing trust, I found in my experience that communicating that uncertainty is actually the best way to start building trust. When there's a scientist or a leader that's coming in and it's preaching to you about, oh, this awesome technology and this is what it is that we can do and we can take A and B, and you're painting this rosy picture, you need to do that, of course, to get buy-in and to show your credibility and express what the benefits of your technology is, but without being realistic and bringing in what risks there are, then, as human nature, humans are hardwired to be skeptical. We want to question things, and it's the way that we've evolved with time. You have to question what these things are so that we don't ultimately do things that could lead to harm. And so by being open about, here's the technology that we have, here are the things that we want to do, here are all the things that could potentially go wrong. Having that conversation brings you down from this level of, I'm an educator and I'm talking to you, and like a one-sided direction to, hey, let's get eye level. Let's talk about the things that could potentially go wrong. And it shows a little bit of vulnerability, but that, in my opinion, is key in this exercise of building trust. It's to open up a little bit to show where things could potentially go wrong, But then the key about that, about not losing trust is, well, once you've openly explained the things that could potentially go wrong, then you come in with your game plan and say, hey, this is what industry has done in the past. Here are all the things that could potentially go wrong, but here are my thoughtfully put together plan of what we could do to, one, to minimize that risk so that those bad things don't happen. And then if you want to get really deep into it, which scientists are really great at doing, is, okay, I did my best to minimize all these risks by doing all these things that industry typically does. And then a level further is, well, let's say the bad thing does happen. How can we clean it up? What would we do? Who would we call? And then it's in that exercise that trust is built. Now, the last thing that I'll say is, so communicating uncertainty and complexity without losing trust. So it's good to talk about the good stuff that your tech does. Then you bring in what risks are involved, and then talking about how we minimize those risks, how we can mitigate in case the risk goes wrong. And then the last point of it is like the KISS principle. Keep it simple, stupid. I don't know if I'm allowed to swear in a mic. But this is something that me, as background in chemical engineering, as a scientist, engineer, this is something that I struggle with because I understand all the nuance in my technology, and I want to be forthcoming. I want to be forthcoming, transparent, open about all the things that could go wrong. But the risk that I face of doing that is actually overwhelming my audience. So this is something. It's a bit of an art. Now being able to be open and transparent, but also not overwhelm the person that you're talking to, getting too technical. I know all the nuance and I want to communicate it, but sometimes it's not strategic to go that deep. And so what I'm learning at the end is, okay, so not to lose trust, or in order for me to communicate those things and then not lose trust, is I need to rehearse my script a little bit, and I need to be quite direct and concise. I need to be able to summarize things so that my audience is able to understand, okay, your tech, how great it is, these are the risks, oh, this is the plan that you can use to minimize risk, to mitigate in case things go wrong, and then keep it super simple and streamlined so that my audience, or the person with whom I'm communicating this with, could potentially go back and take my 3 bullet points and take it to their superiors when they're trying to figure out how to get this project moving.
Perfect, thank you. Jim, would love your perspective on this.
Thanks. So to give you a bit of context in terms of what we do, we're an enhanced rock weathering company. For those of you that don't know, we put silicate rock onto agricultural land. That replicates the natural rock weathering cycle and draws CO2 out of the atmosphere. But the bicarbonate that we produce, we want that into the ocean. So it's then going to go through the water system, through the rivers, all the way out to the ocean. So we have a raft of stakeholders in this process that we have to build trust with, starting in particular with the farmers. And I think the most surprising thing for me that I've learned is that everybody is interested in science. Everybody has a deep interest in what's happening, what's going on, but they don't necessarily have the same level of knowledge. In fact, they have very different levels of knowledge. It doesn't matter whether it's the person extracting the minerals at the quarry site, or the farmer spreading them, or the contractor going onto the land to do it. They want to understand why they're doing it, what's going to happen, and what the benefits are. And that adds a massive layer of complexity for us because we can't communicate the same to everybody. And we can't even communicate the same to people in the same roles. People who are the same, two different farmers will have very different understanding of what they're trying to do. So it's really a case of tailoring your message each and every time. And where we end up with is, or the policy we've come to with all of our conversations, is radical transparency. And we find that we have to be really, really open about everything we're doing. We also have to think about this in a slightly nuanced way, because we have to think about it from the perception of the farmer. We're not just asking the farmer to do something that could be good for the environment, could be good for their land, but we are also asking them to lend us their most valuable asset, their soil. And there's an intrinsic risk to the farmer in doing that. If we do something wrong to their soil, it's their number one asset. And that's the first thing we've got to overcome. So the conversations with farmers often end up being a case of, look, we can show you this isn't going to do any harm. We can't actually show you the benefits, the upside, because sometimes that upside can take multiple years. Sometimes it's immediate. Some farmers get a great benefit, but we're in a complex system. And so we have to be really open with them to build that trust. And it's through each of those conversations, every conversation we have has to be consistent, has to be the same coherent message told in a different way. And I think that's where the real complexity comes. But that's where we build the trust, by identifying those risks, by showing those risks openly, but also showing that we've made it so these aren't going to have a negative impact, that the downside risk is covered, the upside reward we can't always quantify.
Thanks. That's really interesting. Julia.
Yeah, those were all amazing points, and I think they really set us up really well for the next part of the conversation. I will also give a little bit of context. I come to this field as a social science researcher, so not really like from the industry side of things. So the way we engage with communities is very different potentially from the way someone from the industry engages with communities. And to give a little bit more context still, I mostly engage with communities on the west coast of Canada and the US. And for this reason, I mostly focus on marine carbon dioxide removal, which usually adds a layer of complexity because we all know that people have very strong feelings about the ocean. And also we do engage with communities whose main industry is like the fishing industry, which again, feels really strongly about what you're doing to the ocean and what you're doing to their land. So I'll say that. And I will answer the first question in terms of like what's been the most surprising and challenging experience by telling a story. And the story I will tell you is about a public engagement session that we were doing last year in Vancouver, BC. This was with the general public, so people who have potentially never heard about carbon dioxide removal, let alone marine carbon dioxide removal. And we were engaging again as independent social science researchers. People knew we were audio recording them, and we were very clear about our positionality. We told them, hey, we're not working with like a developer. We just want to know more or less what you think about this. And in the room we were doing the engagement in, there were some cameras, sort of like security cameras. And people went absolutely crazy. They started asking us, are you all video recording us? Will you be sending the videotape of this conversation to developers to sell us this technology eventually? And to me, that was sort of like a wake-up moment. I was just, oh, that's where people are coming from. That's the very high level of mistrust that we're dealing with right now. And that's a really challenging way to start a conversation, because then people, of course, started being very skeptical of our intentions there. And no matter how many times we were telling them, hey, like, we have very rigid and strict ethics standards, at UBC, where we were doing the research at, we cannot, videotape you without your consent. It didn't matter. People were really convinced of the fact that we were gonna use that information to then manipulate them. So I think that's a great way to sort of like set the stage for the rest of the conversation. This is really where some communities are coming from. It's really important to know that.
Yeah, wow, okay. That's so interesting. It's like I've experienced this as a researcher myself. Is like sometimes you come with an idea and you're labeled as a project proponent. So yeah, okay. So and that this your response, Julia, is a perfect segue to my next question. Is from your perspective, what does effective public engagement look like in science and technology today?
Yeah, that is a great question. It's really a sort of process of constantly learning. I feel like all the speakers here answered the first question that you asked, Jennifer, by already mentioning some very important points. Something I really heard was being transparent and really dealing with uncertainty, and that's something that I'm definitely going to reiterate. There is a lot of uncertainty when it comes to these technologies, and people will always, you talk to people about field trials, right? Because mostly we're doing this as the sort of like field trial scale, especially in the marine ocean removal space. And people are like, all right, cool, field trials. How about scale? Tell me about 10 gigatons of carbon removal, right? That's what I care about. What will happen if you actually scale this up? And the truth is that oftentimes you don't know, right? You're just still really trying to figure that out. So the transparency part of it is key because you are part of a learning process, and you want to involve people in that learning process. But something else was something that that Juan was mentioning earlier, which is engage communities early on in the process. What we do oftentimes is we go to communities once a project has already been in the works. So we go there and we're like, okay, well, we have this idea for this project and we're gonna cite it here, and this is more or less how things are gonna go. Communities will immediately be very skeptical because they will ask you, okay, but then why are you telling me this? There's no way I can change your mind about where you're citing this project. There's no way I can change your mind about, like, even if I'm opposed to this, I cannot do anything. I cannot influence the process. Which leads me to another important lesson learned, that is, you need to tell communities what your goal is when you're engaging them. Most of us will be familiar with the participation letter, right? It goes from sort of like consultation to community agency, and there's a sort of like scale and spectrum there. You need to tell people what you will be able to do with the information that they're giving you. The feedback they are giving you, where are you going to be implementing it? Where is it gonna go? Are you actually, as a developer or as a researcher or as a government official, going to be changing the deployment of your field trial or of your project because of what the community is telling you or not? That's such a vital question that needs to be answered transparently. And it's really, and that's a question that, communities deserve to hear an honest answer about that, although it's often complicated.
Yeah, okay. I am now going to go off script, everyone, because this is really, really fascinating. Okay, so I think I have a question for the entire panel, and I have one specific to Juan. So for Juan, I'm just thinking when we talk about public engagement, we're just like, it's the public. But there are many different publics. So I'm wondering if it was like your perspective as like an educator, someone who's called on to speak to the media, what do you think is effective? And then for the panel, I'm just like wondering what you've been talking about is, I think, pretty universal to effective public engagement, but what might be special about geoengineering that requires maybe extra effort or extra explanation? And it's like, that's different from, say, your like, run-of-the-mill major projects, like big hydro dam, I don't know, pipeline, et cetera. Like what's special, or is there anything special about public engagement around geoengineering? So we'll start with Juan as an educator, and then it's like a free-for-all on what is special and what is not.
Okay, so I don't think there is anything special about these technologies. I think we have fall prey as a research community on building ourselves this very difficult problem that we need to solve, when in reality it's just a problem that everybody has solved all the time or failed to solve, but it's not different. Like, people are gonna be faced with difficult decisions, and we don't know all the information that we need to make these decisions, and we still make these decisions. And the process in which that happens is not only through us as researchers engaging with the public, or as practitioners and developers engaging with the public. Is a social process that has really very little that is unique, other than, and I will say this as the fact that these are local projects with global impacts. And I think at that point, then you have to ask the question, who is my audience? I'm speaking, if I'm developing a project in, let's say, close to the coast in Vancouver, is my audience those people, or is my audience everybody? Because the effect of marine cloud brining is gonna be global. So I think there is nothing unique. I also would like to say that when we make it unique and we want is celebrating how clever we are on addressing these difficult problems, we actually get in the way of progress. And we've seen that not only in solar engineering, and by the way, when I'm talking about solar engineering, I'm talking about research only. We're way far away from actually thinking about that in real life. But just as developing a research program in solar engineering, we get in the way because we think that is so unique, but it really is not. And then we speak of uncertainty as if it's a block, as if we have never faced uncertainty, or is that the only way we make difficult decisions, we have full information. But we have never done that. So the question becomes like, at which point people understand that there is enough information there to actually make a decision. A decision could be just to stop this project out of that, or the decision could be like, let's go ahead to the next stage in this project. But we have always made decisions under uncertainty as long as we communicated from the beginning. I think there is nothing too weird or special about it.
Okay. Who else wants in on this? Vida?
I also want to go off script by asking a question. Is that okay?
Yeah.
So, Julia, thanks for sharing that story, for opening up. It is really eye-opening, and like, you can have a plan and then you go into a place to do a thing and then it doesn't necessarily go to plan. And so my questions were a couple of things. So yes, we know that engaging with public early is the best way you can go. If you're in already with a project and you're going in, then exactly like you said, you're not going to get that fair exchange. From the perspective of a small company who is cash-strapped and who's deploying every dollar of funding that we get into technology and building, I would love to go into the potential communities that I would like to deploy in and do that engagement. But funding is, like, right now, my dollar, what I need to do is develop my tech, get stuff out there. So there's one, I want to ask for some advice about that. But a second thing that you mentioned, and that I want to have a little bit of a spar, if you're willing to engage in that, is what, and I've never done this, and this is just from some training that we've gotten about how we would engage with community. If you're going into a conversation and you've got an agenda, then my learning was that that's probably actually not great, because instead of being able to ask open-ended questions and learn, you're coming with this intent of trying to convince your crowd. And so the piece of advice that we got was, okay, when doing community engagement, to start, don't create your own event, go where community is already meeting and go with an open mind to ask those questions. But now I see that, okay, they may think that my intentions are bad and what are you trying to get out of this? And so how would you suggest that a small company start with, I want to start early, I want to do it right. What advice could you give me?
This is such a great question, Vida, and I get it all the time. I had other, people coming to me and saying, well, the funding landscape is not great right now, especially for companies in the US, for instance, who come to me. And they're like, and also, if I don't have a plan, what do I go to communities with? Like, what kind of conversation we have? And I think this goes into a little bit into the next stage of like our panel, talking about where engagement should go. I don't think it's necessarily up to, each and every developer to go to communities and talk to them. I think there should be a broader plan for community engagement that potentially, speaks to them from a broader perspective. And these also, and I'm gonna take advantage of this, of where I want to go here to answer Jennifer's question, which is, I do understand what you're saying, Juan, in terms of, geoengineering not being that different. But what I see a lot in communities is that when you go and engage communities about like solar energy or like wind energy, they're like, okay, I do see the benefit. Like potentially you install a solar panel on my roof and my energy bills go down, and potentially I could like even sell that energy, put them back into the grid, et cetera, right? And I've engaged communities on solar, and they say that all the time. I kind of see the benefit. When I go engage communities and publics about geoengineering, they're like, okay, but what is the benefit for my community, right? They don't see it, right? They're like, okay, well, you're solving a global problem, but then I just don't see what it's doing to me, right? So that's a sort of different perception that communities have, and it's really a challenge. And I'm going there because, to your question, I feel like ideally, in an ideal world, we would need to completely reimagine the way we do engagement so that we're not only talking to communities about one single technology every time we're trying to implement a project, but we're talking about energy transitions and climate transitions as a whole. And I know it's not necessarily like a super satisfactory answer from the point of view of like a developer, but I feel like that's the way we need to go if we really want to build trust. And to the second part of your question, Vida, yes, meeting communities where they're at rather than going with like your agenda is really important. And I think that could be done potentially by, yes, like attending some community meetings and knowing community members. And by community members, I usually tend to think about community groups that are already formed, and kind of like talk to various like community organizations who are already speaking to their publics, and say, hey, like, you know, we're here, we want to do this. How can we make it happen together with like other community objectives and so on? So,
Can I add something?
Can I jump in on that one? So I think, and perhaps this is a slightly different stage. You're trying to deploy new technology in a first scale-up where we've been deploying for quite a while. We know we're de-risked as long as certain constraints are around the technology. So we feel very safe deploying the technology. So we've done a lot of that early community engagement that I think you're talking about, and I think we've done quite a good job of that in building consensus with people. We are now doing community engagement to sell. And let's call it what it is. To deploy, you actually have to go into the communities, you have to persuade them of the benefits. Often we're working, when I think specifically about our agricultural communities, we're talking about people who are towards the right wing of politics, very conservative audience. Sometimes we're working with people who don't believe in climate change. You know, they are on the Trump bandwagon. This isn't even real. So the conversation there we're having is very, very different. We're having conversations about the soil and the degraded soil. We're having conversations about the benefits to the farmer. We're having conversations about the benefit to the local community. You know, fortunately for us, our technology is very heavily locally deployed. We can only move this material a few hundred kilometers. So there's local truck drivers. We're empowering the local community to do CDR at scale. But CDR is not something that's meaningful to them. Resilience to climate change, they get, you know, being able to store more water in their soil, being able to put the nutrition back into the degraded soils, being able to get potentially a better crop yield, lower input costs, more contracting work of spreading this material, the quarry work, the haulage work, that's what the community cares about. So there's a large element here when we talk about sort of tailoring the message, is also making sure it's what matters to the community and not trying to put what I care about deeply. You know, I'm a mission-driven founder we're trying to leverage capitalism, hijack capitalism for good is the way I think about it. We need huge amounts of money coming into climate change if we're going to tackle it. The only way you get that sort of level of finance is from the capital markets. You have to build for-profit companies to do this stuff. And so that's what we're trying to do. But that's not the message that the people that matter to me want to hear. So we have to go to them and take a message that they care about and understand their world and really put ourselves in their shoes. And I think that's slightly different to the early engagement we did. And it's different to the engagement we're doing with the river networks and the ecology. And I'm an ecologist by training. So that's sort of where I do get to and think about how do you protect that? How do you protect the marine environment? Is there any risk there? And those conversations are very different. But the communities we work in, we have to go to them with something that matters to them.
Can I add something? So just adding to this, and I think it also responds a little bit to Julius and a little bit to you. I don't think, now I'm on. Okay. So I think I'm in a bar now, like we're gonna engage in a conversation. So I think one of the main issues that we face is that we think of this technology as this very monolithic thing that just comes in as we thought it, and we have to explain it in that way to the world. But in reality, like Jim was saying, is that these technologies really provide services. And we need to think from this as being kind of modular in what they do, on the message that we can deliver around these technologies, and understanding them, like this is so complex and difficult because look, all of these elements that this technology has, is instead of thinking like, oh, actually, there are examples of a little bit of this technology that I can find somewhere else, and that I can engage with the community through that. So, for example, you were saying that it's hard for communities to understand what are the benefits of these technologies, but communities have been approached to do national projects before, hydro plants, pipelines, whatever it is, that have the same idea, like what is the benefit of this large project for me? And I'm not saying that those technologies are exactly geoengineering technology, but we can learn from the part of other technologies that actually have in common. And I think this goes back to this idea of I do understand that you have limited resources. And I think one of the mistakes that we're doing is that every time we go to a community, we engage it from zero. And they get tired. Like there are people, I have students doing research in the North, and they're like, it's another person coming in to ask me questions about this. And on top of that, you're taking time from our community meetings to actually talk about this. And so I think the way we engage, it has to be a little bit more, like Julia was saying, a little bit more programmatic. It's not up to you to go every time and explain everything from scratch. And I think this has two elements. First is like a coordination, because again, communities are not there to listen to people talk about their projects. But also, so that is a coordination, but also it has to be some sort of process that early companies can follow, and that by following the process, they can actually say, look, we are truly engaged with these communities in the way that I'm expecting to engage, not reinventing the process every single time. Something that comes to mind for me is these internal review boards. There is a way in which you want to get funded to get a project going at university, and there is a process out there. And you follow the process, and if the institutional review board says, let's check, then you move on. You don't need to reinvent the ethical approval process every single time you do a project. So I think something like that will be beneficial for the communities as well as for initial startups.
I absolutely agree. And I think that both Juan and Jim, you're speaking to such an important point, which is the continuity of engagement. It shouldn't be a one-off engagement opportunity that these communities have. Engagement fatigue is so real for many communities, especially First Nations. Sometimes we reach out and they're like, as you said, Juan, we've been engaged about this so many times. We're so tired. We don't want to have to deal with this. So really, your points are definitely resonating.
Okay, I want to pivot just a little bit, and so like in Juan's opening personal reflections, he raised the issue of people asking about chemtrails and other fun stuff like that. So for Jim and Vida, I want to ask, like, how has growing public scrutiny of emerging climate technologies impacted how you approach your work, and if so, how?
Okay, so I think it's interesting. I think one of the key things that we've seen change is Trump in the US. You know, it felt like the US was actually moving quite productively forward, and there's a whiplash from that. There's a whiplash from that across the world. I'm based out of the UK. We're certainly seeing it. We saw, or I observed, Canada very narrowly avoid quite a bad whiplash to that same effect. I think it has a really interesting impact that spreads a lot further. People are able to throw things at you that without scientific reasoning. So we get challenged on all sorts of things, and this is And I think it's made us better. It's made us go to that radical transparency I talk about, because we have to be really open about everything. We have to show data sets. You know, we're sharing what would normally be thought of as highly IP data sets, you know, really new knowledge where in our field we've moved ahead of the academic community in a lot of areas. We've got the biggest data sets in the world. We've got processes that people haven't seen before, people don't understand, that are in our IP, and they're effectively trade secrets that give us a competitive advantage. We're opening those up to the academic community. We're opening them up rapidly and well ahead of when we normally would, and sometimes before we're even 100% confident in what we've seen, because it feels important. And that's to try and take the consensus with us. And I think that this is the nature of the problem that we're facing. We have to be moving really fast. The climate change isn't waiting for us. We've got to be deploying ahead of when it would normally be comfortable to deploy. We've got to do that in a responsible way, and with that comes the need for us to be really transparent about why we think this is okay, and to show that much more publicly than we probably would feel we normally would, but we could probably also go slower with another problem. The scale of this problem and the time we have to get to scale is so pressing when you look at it in terms of people like to talk about it against the oil and gas industry, and trying to do what the oil and gas industry has done in 100 years, we need to do in 10. And you look at the scale of the oil and gas industry, it's just massive. That's what we're up against. And I don't think we should take risks. We know we can't take risks when we're talking about things like farmers' land. One misstep there, and the whole field's done. Not just us, the whole field. And so we've got to apply precautionary principles, and that's what we do. At the same time, we've got to move as fast as we dare within that, and making sure that it's safe. And yeah, that ultimately, radical transparency, share what we've got, try and share it safely, try and accept that we are a commercial organization, and ultimately I have investors that I have to try and make a return to, but also how do we take the field as fast as we possibly can without causing risk, would be the key message from me.
I really commend the radical transparency bit. And if you guys haven't checked out the work that Jim and his company is doing at Undo, check out their website. It's pretty cool. And it's interesting because a lot of the things that make a company strong do have to do with IP and trade secret, but then wanting to be radically transparent, you're kind of in this place where you want to remain competitive, but you also want to share. And so anyhow, I very much commend the work that Jim and Undo does. How has growing public scrutiny of emerging techs impacted how you approach your work? For tariff fixing, we do direct air capture, so taking carbon dioxide molecules out of the atmosphere. We have big fans that draws in air. Our technology is specifically suited for cold climates. We're the only ones who are specifically engineering direct air capture for the cold. And the public scrutiny that direct air capture gets, we're slapped in every direction. Your CapEx is too high, so energy intensive, carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, it's so dilute. How much energy do you need to be capturing this? And then there are other companies who have raised a lot of funds and who have deployed and who don't have much to show for it. So now the third slap that we're getting is direct air capture doesn't even work. And so how does, and then just like Jim and Undo and the rest of us here, we're quite mission driven, and we know that we need to do this. We need to clean the atmosphere from carbon dioxide. We have to deploy technology. And so we're trying to dodge all these slaps and still try to stay on course. And if I'm to share personally about how that has affected tariff fixing, we've had to pivot markets. And that's because investors, so the way we get funding, of course, is through government. There's also private equity. And the investors are becoming more and more wary of putting money into companies whose sole mode of revenue or business model has to do with carbon credits or government and policy. And so what we've had to do was explore different markets in which our company can survive and thrive without the need of policy being in the right place, or basically we had to diversify. So one of the key benefits of our technology, we use zeolite, which is a mineral made of silica and alumina, and it's an adsorbent, and that's what traps the CO2, no chemical reactions involved. And one of the key benefits of our technology, and we have IP around this, is actually in the production of high purity CO2. Now, we know that carbon dioxide is a big, bad greenhouse gas, but it is also a commodity used in food preservation, beverage. In the United States alone, they consume 10 to 11 million tons of CO2 in those industries. And so what we've done is we've explored the market and we've identified a pain point specifically for northern communities that have difficulty accessing this molecule of CO2 for usage. And it's crazy because we talk about CO2 and how much of it we have, but there's actually a scarcity of it in the merchant market, those who buy and consume CO2. And the reason for that is because the way the merchant market is supplied is off the back of third-party industrial plants. I'm going to get a little bit nerdy here. On the back of ethanol plants, fermentation, natural gas, you capture, or gas suppliers will capture the flue gas from there and purify it, take the CO2 and then be able to sell it. But those big industries aren't actually found, those third-party plants, there are not many in northern climates. And so there's all of this shipping that has to happen between the capture of your molecule of CO2 and then to bring it up to the communities to use it. And so specifically in northern Canada, in Alaska, and in Greenland, we found a bit of a niche where we can deploy our technology. And though it really pains me at this stage not to be able to sequester it, at least being able to capture that molecule of CO2, we can measure how its greenhouse gas footprint is actually much, much lower. In fact, it's a carbon negative source of CO2. So there are benefits for sure for the environment because we're taking the carbon dioxide for usage from the atmosphere, but it's caused us to have to pivot and to show investors that we can build projects, we can deploy technology that have benefits for local communities needing a product, and in this case, it's CO2 in the near term, and then having to build that story out of, okay, once we're able to penetrate that market of high purity CO2 for northern climates, northern communities that need the molecule, how can we use this technology? How can we scale it for the broader carbon removal industry and the greater good of the world? So basically, Jim, I love what you said. We're hijacking capitalism to do good or trying to do that. So that's a tangible way in which public scrutiny has affected our company. In the near term, we've pivoted markets. We have this play about doing high purity CO2 from the air to serve communities who need to use the CO2, and then later on being able to shift into this broader scrubbing gigatons worth of CO2 from the atmosphere.
Great, thanks, Vida. And just a reminder, start thinking of your questions and keep them coming to me. Again, my cell is 403-462-7158 if you want to text me your question. Julia, I want to bring you into this. And part of the issue we're facing, and maybe in public engagement, is there's also like the chemtrails issue. There's information overload, and so how do you think that public engagement needs to evolve in an era of increasing misinformation, disinformation, declining institutional trust?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think partially it was answered in the way we were speaking about the need for engagement as a broader, like really engaging community, having a process for engagement, having a plan for engagement. In Canada, and this has happened already, my colleague Sarah Nawaz at the Institute, but also my research supervisor, Holly Cajano, they published a paper last year talking about the need for a US independent, regional independent public body for engagement. And I think this is exactly what we should move forward and what we should move towards. As I was mentioning before, communities really care about the energy transition and the climate transition, but they need to see the benefits, and sometimes those benefits can be achieved when carbon dioxide removal is coupled with other technologies. So something we've heard in the Pacific Northwest, for instance, was when we talked about marine carbon dioxide removal was, well, okay, can we think about tidal energy with it? Can we think about offshore wind? Can we also have renewable energy that comes with geoengineering, that comes with carbon dioxide removal? And I think that's really the key, and it really speaks to your point earlier, Vida, in terms of like, you don't have to do everything as a project developer alone. It should be really a structured engagement process. And I think this is possible. We can potentially do it. We just haven't really we have to do it. It's so important because that speaks to the whole point of giving communities agency in terms of how they want to see their energy and climate transition and the benefits and needs of it. And I also wanted to add something to your point, Vida, now about the fact that this is needed. Like, the reason why this broader engagement processes are needed is that, for instance, communities, what you were saying about potentially now using the CO2 for something else, finding an industry for it to then scale up, brings up a lot of questions usually for communities, because they tell you, oh, but then that's not carbon removal, right? Then the carbon is kind of like going back into the atmosphere, and it brings a lot of like moral hazard considerations for them. So really being able to see the broader picture of what we're doing would be really important in this case, especially.
Anyone else want to get in on that? Juan?
Yeah, I want to respond to something, a concern that I see a lot on people that are doing good or trying to do good with their companies like Jim and Vida, I'm going to call them green startups, but whatever. They have this purity test that they need to satisfy, that no other company needs to satisfy. So if you are not aligned with the goals of the community that you are coming from, then suddenly you are impure and what you are doing is no longer valid. So go ahead, sell the CO2, because that's the step. And you know how you're going to get to the next one, which is actually sequestering. But you need this. You need these things to actually be able to fund the next project and to go deeper into what your vision for the company is. And I think this, the fact that it's coming from the inside the community of people that are supposedly aligned to address the challenge of climate change, and we attack each other because we are not as pure as we are supposed to be. And in the meantime, we have people that are denying climate change, and they can get away with whatever because there is no purity test for them to pass. And I'm saying, like, really jump in, do what you have to do, keep going, keep the company going, because that's what is going to transform eventually into something that you really want to do. And abandon this idea that we have to do everything perfectly, because that means we're not going to do anything. And this is not an invitation to be reckless. It is, I'm talking specifically to people like you two that actually are conscious of the consequences of your actions. So this is not like an invitation for every company to do it. It's just speaking directly to you two, really. And many others that actually should be doing a lot more and be more free to actually act positively in the world without the risk of like losing respect, because we are not perfect.
Good, thanks. That was also a great segue for one of my text questions. We will also take questions from the microphones on the floor if anyone wants to ask a question that way. So the question is about public trust in these technologies. And the question is, do you think the political framing of CDR as a catch-all solution while fossil fuel investment continues or increases affects public trust in these technologies? And I know it's like it's talking to some of my students, it's that they think that like CDR is to, or like direct air capture is to enable increased fossil fuel production, and I think it's like there's maybe some moral qualms around these technologies. So free for all. Who wants to take it? Jim? Yes, please.
Definitely, yes, please. There's no moral hazard. It's just ridiculous. This is back to the oil and gas lobby. You know, these are huge organizations. They have an outdated business model. It's not the cheapest fuel. It's not the cheapest power. They're a dying industry that is fighting to survive, and they will throw whatever they can at us. They do not want us to exist, and they are trying to undermine what needs to happen. They need this not to exist because it's going to increase the rate of their decline. They want to keep their very profitable sector. We've seen this before. This is the cigarette playbook. You know, deny, misinformation, cause confusion, and try and stop this. there's no link between what we're doing and them being able to continue. Just look at the orders of magnitude difference. We're talking about an industry that today moves a few thousand tons of CO2 out of our atmosphere every year. It's tiny. We've got to be honest with ourselves. We are not doing anything near the scale we need to do. Today, we're building the building blocks that hopefully over the next few years will start to scale, and that we'll get to millions of tons, but we're going to need tens of billions of tons. I don't even think the IPCC report of 10 billion tons per year by 2050 is anywhere close to realistic. We're going to have to draw down a huge amount of what's already there. We're going to have to agree what that's going to be. What parts per million do we want to come back to? It's probably around 350, I think. That means we're probably going to need 50 billion tons a year, whereas today we're doing a few thousand tons. This is not anything more than the oil and gas lobby trying to undermine us, and as you can probably tell, I get agitated by it.
I'll add a point or two to that, Jim. Carbon dioxide removal is a tool. And like many tools, just like a hammer, if someone came up and said, oh, your hammer, you swung that at someone's skull, oh, they're dead, you should never do that. No, like this is a tool, and yes, of course, the person who's holding that tool then decides the fate of like the action that happens afterwards, but to say that carbon removal is just an excuse to keep emitting is completely ridiculous, and it's distracting, and it's not helpful. But instead to say that this is a tool that we need in our toolbox that we have to develop, that has, without the hammer, can we really build anything? Yes, it can cause harm if you're not using it right, but really the opportunity for all the good that the hammer or this tool can bring is just so much better. And maybe somebody else can give me a better analogy to bring than just a hammer. I'm sure there's better examples there, but that's how I like to see it. It's a tool, we have to develop it, and yes, of course, put it in the hands of the right person, but there's just so much more good that can come from that tool than bad.
Well, the other thing it does is it moves the conversation, which is the other problem, is it moves the conversation away from decarbonising, from stopping using oil and gas onto something else. And even the fact that we're having this discussion is we've been distracted from the real conversation right here today.
I really like the tool metaphor, Vida. I think it's something we always open our engagement with. Carbon dioxide removal is one of the many climate solutions we absolutely need to get to net zero, and to we need to reduce emissions and we need to remove emissions. But to your question, Jennifer, if people do not understand that, if people see the moral hazard risk and think that this is just an excuse for fossil fuel companies to keep polluting, then we have a problem, because we're never going to have community buy-in. We always hear this at workshops. They're like, if this is an excuse for fossil fuel companies to keep producing oil and gas and to keep polluting, we don't want this. So it's really vital to make sure that message comes across. And it speaks to my point of doing engagement that is also about other technologies, other climate solutions. Because if you're just focusing on CDR alone, people are just, hey, are you just trying to legitimize fossil fuel consumption, production?
I'm going to answer your question with a different analogy just because it's yours. I will say like a vacuumer is better than a vacuumer is better than a hammer, given that that's what you're doing in the sky. You don't go with a hammer anyways. I will say this question also reflects a little bit, and I understand it, and I know exactly where it's coming from, and I shared in large part the concern. But it also is like something that we build ourselves in, again, because of this purity obsession. And the fact that we cannot, there are people within our community, I'm talking about people that want to leave a better world for the future. So hopefully everybody. But is the idea that is such a pure a value that we have, like so ingrained in us, that any small violation of that is rejected. So we don't accept trade-offs. But if I ask you today, if we want to absorb or reabsorb or capture the amount of CO2 that we have produced in the last century, we're going to need the same amount of materials, and we're going to have to deploy them much quicker. And that requires the oil companies to actually be out there, because we don't have a substitute yet. We are not going to build a carbon capture system, global system, with solar, because solar is not there. With wind, because wind is not there. At this, obviously, it's there and it's doing a lot, but it's not at this capacity. So we need to accept this trade-off. Now, I'm saying that then oil companies directly funding these projects doesn't erode trust. Of course it does. But the fact that we cannot accept that we're going to be transitioning away while these companies are still available, and while these companies are the ones that hold all the money for the transition. Otherwise, where is the money coming from? So we need to accept and deal with this trade-off and stop the purity test and start saying, like, look, yeah, I'm going to sell my stuff to all companies because they have the money so I can do what I want to do. And the way I think companies can be held accountable is by their boards, by being open about what their plans are, by opening their investments and the funding, where it's coming from, so that people can trust them, like, yeah, I know you're selling your stuff today to our companies, but I trust you that you are transitioning away from this, and this is a business model that is gonna get us somewhere else. And that's it's a very theoretical way to think about the problem. I know it's hard, but I think we have to go there.
You can't be an economist on a stage without talking about trade-offs, right?
I know, exactly.
All right, we'll take questions from the floor. So we'll go over here first.
Okay, so is this on?
No.
I don't care if it's on or not. I'm funded to conduct research on meaningful public engagement in AI. If anyone is interested, please look me up. But I'm liking some of the stuff I'm hearing and not liking.
So what is your name if we want to look you up?
Sorry, what?
What is your name if we want to look you up?
Renee Sieber. I'm at McGill University.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. I just want to say that some of the stuff I'm liking is that engagement is not the same as communication, and you do not solve engagement with communication. Great. And I like radical transparency. So radical transparency equals, if you're selling something to a community, just be upfront and say you're trying to sell something. You're not necessarily engaging with the community, you're selling something. But radical transparency does not equal accountability. And sometimes, and it is, facilitation is not the end goal. And this is uncomfortable for us as researchers and practitioners, that when I go into community and I'm talking about AI or mapping, and they say, what I really want is a public health center, what is my responsibility to make that happen? So how do all of you feel about linking engagement, communication, and transparency to action items that you will do for the communities that you're engaging with?
Great question. Who wants to take? Julia?
You are absolutely right. And that was exactly my point about communities wanting to know how you will integrate their feedback into the projects. And as a researcher, I'm in your same situation, right? I go into communities and people are like, okay, how will you be using what I say? And once again, as researchers, we need to be transparent and we need to tell them, well, we cannot necessarily integrate your concerns and feedback because we're not the project developers and we're not the project deployers, which again goes back to my, potentially having a regional independent engagement buddy that is connected to project developers, being the government or like companies like yours. That could be a potential solution, because then finally you can implement that feedback into the actual projects. But I feel like maybe your perspective would be more interesting as actual developers of projects, because that's something that we're trying to tell our fellow developers. We're trying to tell them, well, you need to tell communities how to integrate that feedback and those opinions.
Sure, but I'm not going to let you off the hook there. I think as researchers, we do have an obligation.
Absolutely. I can tell you in terms of researchers what we're doing. Because we do a lot of community-based engagement research, and I can tell you how it looks like lately. So what we're doing right now as researchers, like what we can do is co-development of knowledge for these technologies. So in our latest research project, we've partnered with Ocean Modelers. And we've done that. We've done a series of engagement sessions where we've asked people what they wanted to see in the ocean science and what they wanted to see in the ocean models in terms of how what implications those technologies will have. So we went to them and we said, we are going to build ocean models that tell you exactly what you want to learn about how ocean alkalinity enhancement and other marine carbon dioxide removal technologies will impact your coastal environments. They've given us feedback, and we've come back to those to those communities with the models, and we've told them, here's what we found. Here is exactly what this is going to look like. Here's what we couldn't find. That's to your point about transparency, right? These are questions that our ocean models cannot answer. These are questions that, to Juan's point, we're only going to know if we proceed with larger scales of carbon dioxide removal. So that's how, as researchers, we've tried to be able to be held accountable to those communities, right? Like co-production of knowledge, that's where we can go. Once again, where we cannot go is to the development of projects because we're not developing.
Go ahead.
So I think I maybe I'm taking your question a little bit differently, Renee. So when we go into these communities and we present something new, we are introducing a new thing that they need now to trade off with. And they have limited resources. I'm imagining a community in particular with limited resources, Global South or indigenous communities here. So when we go there, if we are not sure that this is worth it, we should not go there. If we're gonna go talk about people about AI, and somebody tells me, yeah, what about health center? And I cannot defend the fact that AI is something worth trading for. I should not be going that. Because now we're forcing a decision that they didn't have before. They didn't have to make. And so there is responsibility every time we approach a community to speak about a new technology of a new project in general. We are introducing a new ways to use resources and possibly new divisions within the community. And that's on us. Because now these are communities that people are gonna try to support. There's gonna be half of the community that supports a project on AI and another one that is gonna support a project on DAC, and they have resources. And that we did. The fact that we introduced the new project, we created a division in those things. So I'm not saying, it's not the research that I do, to be clear. So I don't know how to solve it, but I think thinking carefully about the ethical consequences of introducing new projects is very important.
Great, thanks. Jim?
So we're not that far away from researchers. The difference is when we're doing our research, it's so we can make commercial deployments. If we get that wrong, if we get the research wrong, if we don't tailor this to the community, we don't exist. It's as simple as that. We actually have to go and do the deployment and see what happens. I can give you an example where the research doesn't entirely match up with what happens on the ground. So a lot of people, if you ask them, they'll tell you that we should share the carbon revenue with farmers. And that's something we've looked at. We've looked at sharing carbon revenue with farmers because that feels like a fair way to do things. In practice, when you try and do that, they don't want it. And when I say they don't want it, they'd love to have that as an extra. But what they really want is the minerals for free. And that's what we give them. We give them the minerals for their soil for free because they've been burned by soil carbon programs, which have been out there. So soil organic carbon programs were very much, we're going to share the revenue with you. The revenue was late. The revenue was tiny. It was nowhere near what was promised. So you've got this perception in the market that carbon schemes are some kind of scam on farm. The way we get past that is say, well, what if we give you the minerals for free? So you've no cost of the input. They love that. That's great because it's saving them money. It's saving them cash right there and then and giving them something that shows that we've got skin in the game and that we're aligned with them. But it's a case of how do you deploy on the ground isn't always as it would appear. And we've just been going through an investment round with a large agricultural financier here in Canada. And they challenged our model and then went out and actually did a whole load of research with farmers on our behalf or their behalf before making the investment. And this was one of the questions that actually they really drilled into. And the research they finally shared with us after we closed the investment a week ago. And it supports what we've been doing, what we found on the ground and what's happening. So I think you can view the project developers really in the same light as researchers. We have to go through the same process if we're going to tailor the project right. But we actually find out whether we did get it right or not. We don't get to hide behind a paper. I'm not sorry, I don't mean to be dismissive of all the great work you do. But we actually have to test it in the real world. We have to go out there and find out whether we're right or wrong and adjust it. And that does happen. You do end up adjusting it.
Great, thank you. All right, please go ahead.
So this comes from a different perspective because Silicon Valley has a track record of emerging technology, but the way that they operate is more about, let's try it and break it. Let's do a whole bunch of different things. One of them will stick. And they deal with consequences afterwards. Now, when it comes to emerging technology, that's a problem because the impacts are not known, especially like if you think about social media in 2001, 2004, when it began to emerge, nobody thought that it would topple democracies or cause complete social breakdown. That was not in the table card. So there's a problem of the dual mandate of government, which is on one hand, they have to promote innovation and they have to remove barriers and make it as fast as possible. And on the other hand, they have to be the regulator that slows it down and stops it. And if you look at the development cycle from pure research to prototype to final product, there's a line there. In the literature, they call it the Collingridge control dilemma, which is the point at what the regulators comes in and says, enough is enough, we're gonna set the rules. Now, maybe I'll get your opinion about where this line should be drawn, because if it's drawn at the early stage where you guys are at, and I'm talking about the regulator coming in with public consultations and that's part of the regular process. If it derails your project because we have infinite talks, consultations, it never ends, it risks basically stopping everything. But if you do it too late, once the technology is out there, and then you find a problem, there's no way to stop it. It's out in the open. It's been ingrained in society. So try to take social media back, good luck. So maybe if I can get what you think about where that line should be drawn, should we still pursue it at the initial stages, in the middle, or at the end? And what are the impacts?
Can I come back on that? So the first thing I would say is we're not software. So this is very, very different to social media. We're working in highly regulated spaces. The mining industry, so the extraction industry, the haulage industry, the agriculture industry. We can't just put anything on a field. We've got all kinds of approvals we have to go through before we do that. So this is very, very different. And we could have a much longer conversation about how this complicates things with Silicon Valley investors who just want you to go super quick. But in that regulated environment, we're not, if we wanted to, we're not able to take the risks to go faster. We have to work within that environment, and we're navigating complex regulations to do that. So I don't see those same risks in any way, shape, or form that you have with something like social media, where it was a new invention in a space that's completely unregulated. That's not my experience. I'd be really interested in Julia's thoughts on the marine space, because that's much more problematic to get things done. We have quite a clear rule book that we can work within. We're trying to navigate through that and find a way to do it. It's virtually impossible to do some things in ocean alkalinity enhancement space from what I see.
Yes, the reversibility point, what we call the reversibility point, is fundamental. People in marine carbon dioxide removal keep asking, okay, what if, is it gonna be too late? Once you've discharged alkalinity, is that gonna be too late? And what I have to say about that is, this is exactly the reason why we need more meaningful community engagement, because that will be a collective decision we take as communities, deciding and deliberating around those technologies. That's a decision that needs to be taken collectively. We need to understand the risks. There might be there might be reversibility, there might not be. So that's a collective decision. I will just leave it to that.
Can I?
Juan, yeah.
Yeah. So I love this question. So it's very academic, I think. But this is the reason why I like it. I think, and I didn't cut your name, sorry.
Jerry.
Jerry?
I'm a PhD, that's why.
Okay, sweet. So to answer this question, you bring it up like a risk from the government's perspective, or the decision from the government perspective as to when to enter. And I see the question, like if it is too early, nothing happens, and if it is too late, it already happened, and there is a lot of inertia that goes as technologies are developed. For example, we might go with a technology that is not as good as an alternative because we didn't regulate it earlier, and now we are doubling down on a technology that was inferior, for example. What I will add, and obviously, I don't have an answer to your question of like where to put it. I would say that there is a similar question that comes from the startups and firms perspective, and it is if there is no regulation earlier on, or if it's too late, then other companies are going to screw up, and it's going to affect them. Yeah, so at some point, the field has to say, like, actually, I need government to tell other companies how we're going to do this, because if a company goes out, does it wrong. You were talking about carbon, and like it kills trust. So I think there is also a question from the private sector of like, at which point do we want the government to intervene? And this is something that is happening quite generally across many industries. It's like at some point, firms are like, no, actually we need a regulation because we don't know how this is going to go. I think the question to René's research is happening on AI right now. People are like, well, don't get too early on regulation, but now they're like, no, actually, we need somebody to tell us how to do this because we might run the risk of ruining the reputation for the industry as a whole. And so this very long answer, sorry, is just to say that there are, again, a trade-off, and there's a balance between what the government wants, what the firms need, and in between those two is maybe we can start to look for an answer to your question.
Okay, great. Please.
Good morning, everyone. Oh, is this on? Yeah, okay, thanks. Good morning. Thanks very much for a really interesting discussion this morning. My name's Rebecca. I work at the University of Guelph in communications and sort of research engagement, knowledge mobilization. One of the things that I was turning over in my mind, listening to all of you speak today, was around the relationship, but like, what does mission-driven, like many of you spoke, very passionately about the importance of the mission and what you're working on. So I was wondering if you could speak a little more around like mission-driven public engagement and how that can potentially then like loop into advocacy. I don't think that's necessarily a problem, but I was just hoping to hear a little bit more about your thoughts around this mission-driven element of public engagement and then the relationship with trust. And thanks again for the panel discussion.
Another great question. Who wants to take it? Vida?
I could speak to it a little bit. So when I say I'm mission driven, it's based on the impact of what I'm doing with my company, what I'm trying to build. I don't think I would walk into a community engagement opportunity with a mission that I'm trying to drive. I don't think that that's the right way to do it. So when I say I'm mission-driven, it's because I'm building a company and I want to remove gigatons worth of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. I know I have to make money and commercialize and all of this just to keep my my lights on and things going, but I'm never going to let go of the why I'm doing this, even though I have to talk the savvy business talk and figure out and convince investors why I'm going to make them a return. But that's not why I'm in it ultimately. But I don't think, in my perspective, and I'm saying this as someone who has not deployed in the field yet, so please take what I'm saying with a grain of salt, but I don't think I would ever go into a community engagement meeting or a thing like this and have my agenda that it is I'm trying to drive. Just like what Julia was talking about and Juan is pointing up, and in Jim, you have to figure out what does the community actually need. And honestly, I have an idea of where I think Terrafix's technology should be deployed and should go. But when I do go there and have that conversation, my plan is to start with open-ended questions and understand what the community wants. And at the end of the day, if what their major needs are, their acute pain points, has nothing to do with my tech, and my tech and what I can bring actually won't bring them benefit, I will likely pack up and go. And to be honest, my investors won't like the sound of that, because they're going to want me to build my technology and deploy and grow. But you know what? It's not the right way to do things. If there isn't right alignment, if everyone at the table doesn't see the direct benefit for them and for me, it's going to be hard to deploy my project. You're going to be fighting tooth and nail. It's better when people are there together. So the mission-driven bit and the community engagement bit, perhaps I didn't interpret your question properly, but that's how I picture it. I hope that's helpful.
Can probably add a little bit to that. It's probably a different stage of development. So it definitely crosses over towards advocacy from my perspective. And I think that's okay. I might get told otherwise, but I think that's okay. We've done, we've exercised precautionary principles. We've done a deep dive on the science. We've seen what happens in the field. We've done a ton of work, and I've left other pathways previously with the reforestation and the peatland, because I think they're good, I think they're important, but they're not going to scale as quick as we need to scale. And as such, you do move to a point where you've got enough knowledge of what you're doing, you've got the community buy-in various places, and like I said earlier on, we're selling to communities, and that's the nature of what you need to do when you're trying to scale it. But that's because we've de-risked it. That's not where we started out. The community engagement early on and the early field trials we did were very much around, does this actually work? Can we actually measure this? Is there a meaningful benefit to communities? And that's where you end up with your radical transparency. We've seen yield increases of 80% on some fields. We see a lot of fields where we see no change, or a 3% change that we can't get statistical significant data from. I can't go and promise a farmer off the back of that, this is going to really help. We're starting to understand where it's more likely to help. And so we're looking to target those areas where there's more benefit for farmers. Then we are advocates, and we become advocates. And I think as long as we're self-aware that that is the change that we are going through, then I think that's okay, but please tell me if not.
I think that's okay.
I was going to say, that's a great way to put it, Jim. And I really like how I feel like collectively for actors and people working in the CDR space, the mission is, sort of solving the climate crisis while benefiting local communities where we can. From a social science perspective, it differs a little bit from your mission potentially in the sense that, and this speaks to the responsibility point, I feel like our responsibility is really to enhance capacity for those community to be able to be informed, discuss, deliberate around these technologies. Like, this is the first thing we do when we enter communities. We're not trying to sell you this. We don't even know if it's like how it's going to play out in the future. Our mission is for you to be able to make your own decisions and to help you doing so, and maybe like influence the discourse and the narrative. So that's our goal and mission.
I just want to double down on this. I think advocacy is great, but it requires a civil society and society in general that is very well informed. And there is a job for everybody to ensure that that is the case. That is not your job, Jim or Vida. It's a society's job to actually train and build capacity.
Okay, we have 1 minute and 9 seconds left. We have a very aggressive countdown timer in front of us. And so we're going to go down the line, rapid fire, final thoughts. I'll start with Vida. key takeaway or just something cool you want the audience to know.
Key takeaway, there isn't an equation to community engagement. It's really case by case, as the panel's been saying. And as an engineer who's obsessed with efficiency and repeatable systems and scalability, I'm not the right person to be at the forefront of it. And so thank you to all of you for your questions and for the researchers in the room and everyone else who's guiding us. And yeah, pleasure to be here.
I think I would build on that. We're not the experts. We really try and just do the best we can, particularly on this side of things. And we value the input of the communities we work in, and we need to listen to those communities. We do. That's what tailoring a product for them ultimately is. I think there are very significant differences, though, pathway to pathway. Marine cloud brightening or SRM or what I would think of as hardcore geoengineering, actual geoengineering solutions, are very different to some of the CDR pathways like we work with. And it's a very different question that we're answering in different areas.
Yeah, that's great. Key takeaway would be technology is never neutral. Don't treat it as such. There are many trade-offs, and the trade-off conversation is exactly what we need. Also, there's no such a thing as a tension between the urgency of solving the climate crisis and community engagement. Engaging communities meaningfully will actually accelerate things.
Yeah, actually, that's what I was going to say. I think the thing that worries me the most is this emergency framework in which it forgives all kind of sins because suddenly we have to do it. But on the other hand, we're running out of time on certain things. No, we're not running out of time. It's not the end of the world, but we need to move fast. And as we move fast, I think public engagement cannot be something that is slowed down all pathways. Is something that removes bottlenecks on the right pathways. So I think we need to stop using public engagement as a thing that we have to do everywhere or not technology move forward because it's useless that way.
Okay, and we are literally out of time. So please join me in thanking the panelists. Excellent discussion.